Mr. Speaker, thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
So let's talk about big picture first. You're going to be the Speaker of the House for the next 2 years. Yeah. What do you want to accomplish in that time? Is there some signature issue that you want to say after the end of these 2 years that you were able to get done?
The most pressing issue, there are many, but the most pressing is health care. Without a doubt, the cost of health care are a runaway train. When I was elected in 2011, it was about 33% of our budget, which is significant, of course. This year, it'll be about 48%. It's growing at a rate faster than anything else, certainly faster than revenues, and still we have 600,000 people without coverage. And so the real issue is not how much of a commitment we've made to spending money on healthcare. The issue is the cost of healthcare. What is causing the cost of healthcare to continue to skyrocket? And that's what we'll be focusing on.
And what do you believe the reasons for the skyrocketing cost of healthcare are?
There are multiple, but chief among them is the hospital setting. Hospitals have become these giant monopolies and conglomerates, due in part to government regulation that allowed them to have monopolies. In fact, that almost insisted that they be the only hospital in a given area. Over the years, these hospitals have started to acquire doctors' offices around them, diagnostic centers around them. They self-refer to their own diagnostic centers, and they take in patients from these doctors' offices they buy. They, in essence, have created a monopoly. The other issue is the great complication of healthcare makes it to where they can charge anything. And people feel like, well, it must somehow be justifiable. Well, in the large amount of cases, it isn't. It's outright price gouging, and we have to get to the bottom of it.
Okay, so how do you break up, what you call a monopoly, how do you break that up?
You begin by undoing some of what was done. The issue of certificate of need, is, or as we know it as CON, is the regulation that says that in order for someone to open a new hospital, there must be considered a need for a hospital. We don't do that anywhere else in our society.
We're here in Miami-Dade County. You're from Miami-Dade County. I see signs all the time. New Mount Sinai medical centers going up all over the county. I think Baptist has done the same thing. I see new medical centers and mini hospitals opening up all around. Are we seeing a reduction in costs as a result?
No, quite the opposite. One of the phenomenons is the standalone emergency rooms. You see them advertised all over the highway. They say emergency, 5-minute wait. Well, I don't know if you've ever been in a real emergency, but you're not hospital shopping at that moment. What they're really doing is that they're having people come in and use these emergency rooms as primary care, and then we're all getting billed for emergency room rates, which of course are astronomical.
But my point being that your complaint was that there are too few hospitals, that we need to loosen the regulations on certificates of need, therefore allowing more hospitals to be created. Aren't we seeing that, though? Aren't we seeing a proliferation of hospitals, for instance, in Miami-Dade County? It may be owned by the same operator, but we're seeing multiple locations around the county. Isn't there more competition?
Well, there is, and I'll tell you why. Because the way the hospitals, one, they're buying each other out, and so they're renaming them, and that's why you're seeing some of that proliferation. But two, additional regulations do not allow specialty hospitals, and that is to say that this is a hospital that will treat only these types of conditions, let's say orthopedic type conditions. Surgery centers that allow you to have your certain surgeries, knee replacement, hip replacements, out of the very expensive hospital setting. None of that is going on. What you're seeing is an expansion of the existing hospitals taking over the environment. They fight one another and they sue one another in court, and when it's our safety net hospitals that are involved, we're paying the bill for that, to not allow each other to be in certain areas. And so what has happened is that the existing hospitals are the ones that are acquiring everything around them and growing astronomically. No efficiencies have been found as a result of that.
So what, again, I guess I just want to dumb it down for me, because I know you're well versed in this subject matter. You know, what should Dade County, South Florida look like? Should there be, in other words, you want to see completely new independent hospitals from the current groups that currently control hospitals?
Well, what I want to see is what the market will bear. And that is to say, if there's a group of doctors that say we only specialize in knee replacements or hip replacements, or we do heart surgeries, and this is what we do, and we want to be able to do it in the most efficient way. We want to be able to make our own deals with the insurance companies to provide just this service. You'll see the quality of that go up, and you'll see the cost come down.
Sort of like a Baskin-Palmer type approach?
Yes, of course.
Having Baskin-Palmer type institutes, but for multiple multiple different needs, whether it's for knee replacements or for other types of issues.
Right. Taking things out of the hospital setting, this giant hospital setting with all its overhead costs, taking those things out of the hospital setting, allowing new providers into the space so that insurance companies and local plans can negotiate with different people for different things. I
had Senator Unetied Flores here just a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about a bill that she has created, which she says a concern that she has is there too much being done in doctor offices. For instance, outpatient type surgeries being conducted in doctor offices without enough regulation or control over that. And as a result, we're seeing an increase in the number of people dying in those types of facilities. How do you balance between a proliferation of groups that may be able to come together and maintaining health quality standards that Senator Unetied Flores says are not there right now?
Well, I had the opportunity to speak with Senator Flores yesterday about just this same issue. Her concern is in specific in cosmetic surgeries and specifically what's going on with some abuses that are going on there. Oftentimes when these abuses take place, they're already acting outside of the law. They're acting outside of the regulation. And so what I think she is trying to do is prevent a proliferation of cosmetic surgery centers that
Do you support her bill?
We're looking at it. I want to make sure that, one, the laws that are in place, if they're being broken, then new laws will not fix that problem. Having a solid understanding and running it through our committees and making sure that we understand what caused these deaths and is the proposed solution going to change that? Oftentimes, there are laws in place. People break them, bad things happen. We create more laws.
So last issue on health care, I just want to raise it because I know people at home may be thinking about it. Florida has rejected the Medicaid expansion dollars to come into the state. Why not take those dollars that would cover somewhere upwards of 800,000 people and at least give them some health care, take dollars as opposed to turning those dollars away?
Well, I would tell you the level of health care that they will get is minimal because many doctors' offices don't take Medicaid.
Is it minimal better than nothing?
Well, it depends. If minimal as a Band-Aid today is better than nothing tomorrow when the price continues to skyrocket. See, here's the challenge in the most basic terms. If we were to say that every citizen has a right to a particular item, and we'd say the state should buy this item for you, whatever you want it to be, but that item now begins to go from $100 to $1,000 to $10,000 to $100,000. Your issue is not buying that item for the consumer. Your issue is what is driving up this cost? And the more government money we pour into it, half of our budget now in Florida, the higher the price continues to go. And a Medicaid expansion would do what it did in other states. You would still have a lot of people getting their health care in an emergency room, particularly these standalone emergency rooms that purport themselves to be almost primary care. And you would not have any additional quality. We have to go right at the cost side of this. For decades now, the price has been increasing, and we've kicked the can down the road. It is now half of Florida's budget. We have a commitment to healthcare. We wouldn't spend half our money if we didn't. But we have to stop the cost side of it.
All right. Let's take a step back for a second. Talk to me. You and I have had conversations in the past, but talk for the viewers at home. What's your guiding principle? How do you describe yourself politically? I don't think you fit neatly into necessarily like a conservative Republican box or a moderate box or any of those others. I think you're on some issues you're fairly conservative, but you also have a very strong libertarian sort of bent to you. How would you describe yourself politically?
Well, I think for me it's quite simple, and that is I think people should be able to make the decisions that they would like to make for themselves. I don't want to encumber someone's ability to make their decisions. I don't want to tell anyone how to live their lives. I also think that when government gets involved in something, and there is so much proof of this as to almost be indisputable, the minute government gets involved in something, it makes it more complicated and it makes it more expensive. And usually the loser is the citizen. The two examples, not to get back to healthcare, but healthcare and education. The two areas where government has gotten deeply involved is in healthcare and in education. And the two areas that are the most expensive for any American, not just in this state, in all states, is healthcare and education. My view is that the private market handles things because interests are aligned in a more efficient and better way. We all have technology in our pockets, which is greater than what it took to put a man on the moon in 1969. But to get an education, which is still done with regular textbooks, is skyrocketing. We're subsidizing it over and over in order to keep tuitions low, but the cost is high. And the number one reason for debt among young people in this country is exorbitant university fees.
So let me ask you this: if your guiding philosophy is to keep government out of people's lives, do you believe that a woman has a right to decide the fate of her own body when it comes to issues such as whether or not to have an abortion?
Well, the challenge there is that there are two lives involved. So where I believe that we should stay out of people's lives, I don't believe that people's lives should be taken. And so the real, and it's a complex issue because one has to think, well, there's a host body, and that host body has to have a certain amount of rights, because at the end of the day, it is that body that carries this entire other body to term. But there's an additional life there. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, in protection of life, and we do that in all our laws, all parties protect life, what is the limit to which we are going to give one person complete power over the life of another? It's a complicated issue. I wish it would fit neatly into libertarian thinking the way a lot of other things do. The truth is it doesn't. So but there are two lives involved.
So if Roe versus Wade is overturned, or if states are allowed more control over this issue, would you favor banning abortions in the state of Florida?
What I would favor is, one, understanding viability. So we have to look at a couple of things. In a situation of incest, rape, I mean, they're one and the same. But in those types of situations, traumatic experiences, minors that are raped and impregnated, we're talking about there are deep psychological effects there. And we have to look at, is one life worth more than the other there? But make no mistake about it, we are making a decision between two lives. And so I don't want to disguise it. What I'm saying is that in the event
Do you believe life begins at conception?
I believe science believes that. I mean, the only definition of science of life is something that grows. From the moment that conception occurs, there begins to be growth. And so scientifically, that's what it is. But that's not the question. The question is, what is the value of that life? And is it subordinate to the value of its host body? So
is the question viability then? So in other words, you would allow abortion up until the point where the fetus was viable? No,
what I've said is that if the life of the mother is in danger, or in the case of a minor who has been raped or the victim of incest rape, the mental capacities of that person are deeply in danger. Those are things we should look at. But viability is also very important. As technology moves along, a human body can exist outside of its host body earlier and earlier. And so then one has to think, to what time does the host body have veto power over this other life?
You realize there are a lot of people who will hear you use phrases like host body and say to you, that's a woman, that's a person. Yeah. That's not a, that's, you know, you're sort of creating a scenario where you're looking at that not so much as a person, but as a host body.
Well, yeah, but you understand that when this discussion is being had, the fetus is also a person, and that is being seen as a fetus. And so we can either use technical terms on both sides, or we can just use both lives. I'd be happy to do either. The real question is, there are two lives. There is a weight and a quality to both. Both need protection. What is that balance?
Let me ask you this. Do you see bills talking about the issue of abortion and viability coming up in this session?
I think that they will, because of what we've seen nationally.
And so where do you think is likely to pass the House, and what would you support and what would you oppose?
I would support things that are consistent with other laws. So in the state of Florida, you cannot get a marriage license without a cooling off period of a couple of days, just to make sure that two capable adults are required to take some time. You're required to take a certain amount of time before you buy a firearm, just in the event that you're making a bad decision for yourself. They're adults, and so without any suspicion that this is a bad decision, you're supposed to take this time. We feel that it is an offense to ask someone before ending another life to take a time and think about it, to fully understand what it is, to share the information. So I think I would like something that is consistent with other things we do in our state.
The assumption that you're making, though, is that the woman has not given thought to it, that has not weighed her options, considered it before walking into a clinic and making that choice. So you see what I'm saying? In other words, you're saying that after some people will hear that and say to themselves, the woman has already made that choice, wrestled with those decisions, decided this is what's in her best interest, walked into a facility, and now is being told you have to turn around, go home, and come back in 48 or 72 hours.
And the same argument could be made for a marriage license. The same argument could be made for the purchase of a gun. We're making assumptions that perhaps we probably should not make. But one thing that we have said as a state is, in these cases, we're asking you to give it some thought, because we think there is some measure of gravity. And what we're also saying is we'd like to provide you with as much information as possible.
All right, let's move on to some other subjects. Let's talk about the budget. The governor has presented a budget that expands spending in a number of different areas. We'll talk about environmental spending, Everglades spending separately. But I just want to know what your general impression is. I know that your initial reaction seemed to be that rather than spending more, we should be trying to spend less in the state of Florida.
Well, and what I meant by that was spending less per capita. So this is a state that is growing at an alarming rate. We get almost 1,000 people a day coming to the state. And so our budget will increase every year. The question is it increasing per capita? And that is to say, are we spending less per resident than we were last year? Now, as we get more residents in, there should be economies of scale in a lot of the services that we provide. And of course, there are increased revenue. So the goal of the House is to craft a budget that spends less per resident than it did last year. It'll still be a budget that's higher than last year's.
So you don't think the governor's presented what he presented was a good budget?
I think it was a good budget. It made some real clear priorities about what the governor would like to see in spending. And I think that if you look at it on a per capita basis, it's only about 0.5% off of where we are. So I think it's a great start. I mean, not all budgets will be exact. The Senate's budget won't be exact. That's what the process is for. He's
calling for spending $625 million on Everglades restoration, water quality related issues. Do you support that?
We do support spending in those areas. We've seen that the challenges that we have had, you had a great special on it, and you know that it is multifaceted. There's not one thing is going to solve this. And we also don't control rain, and we don't control temperatures. And so there's a lot of things that have to get started. One of the things we've got to be careful of in this state is between federal and state, we own almost half the land of the state already. People are very concerned about us buying more land. They feel like that's a form of preservation. What it also is a very expensive component of our environmental
laws. Well, that's what Amendment
laws.
$1 was supposed to be used for, was buying land.
That's
what
correct.
The state voters, then the voters vote to buy more land for that purpose.
And to what ends, one would have to ask. And so the challenge of amendments in general, which is a good subject to probably talk about, is that an amendment is a simple question that must be implemented in a complex way. So if one would say, let's just look at it simply as it was. This is an amendment so that the state keeps buying land. We will keep buying land. The cost of maintaining those lands are very expensive. We oftentimes don't have the capacity to, and you get all sorts of invasive species in there and whatnot. To what ends? Between state and federal, we own half the state. How much should we own?
Well, I want to stay on amendments for a second, but before that, you said that you support additional spending in the area that he's talking about for Everglades. Do you think that the number is likely to be around $625 million?
I think it will depend. I mean, we still have to see what our revenues are going to be for this year.
Well, you're projecting good revenue. You're predicting an increase in revenue, aren't you?
We are, but as you've seen, if you have followed the estimating committee, it's gone up and down, and so we have one last one before we craft our budget. The commitment to the environment and the governor's commitment to the environment is going to be supported by the House.
So let's go back to amendments for a second. The amendment to legalize medical marijuana is an issue that you're going to have to deal with very quickly in the Florida House. The governor has said that he wants to see something pass out of the legislature within 2 weeks, or he may take basically action on his own to whether or not the amendment allows for smokable marijuana.
Right.
The governor seems inclined to lean towards allowing smokable marijuana, but he wanted the legislature to have a chance to weigh in as well. Do you support having smokable marijuana as a form of medical marijuana?
Well, let me tell you what I support personally, and then what we will do in the House in the interest of trying to comply with an amendment. I don't believe that there's no medicine that we know of that is smokable. Controlling the dosage of a medicine in smokable form is not something that can even be done. So there's a challenge between what I think we have to pass because there's an amendment in place and what I would like to see.
So but your personal view cannot guide what you believe the amendment calls for.
I don't get to decide on the question that I wish was before me. I have to decide on the question that is before me.
So how will you decide this question? Will you allow smokable marijuana?
The House will pass a bill that incorporates smokable marijuana.
Will you place the types of restrictions on it, though, that will make it almost impossible for people to get? For instance, going before a panel, putting additional hurdles like maybe 2 or 3 or 4 doctors to have to sign off on it. You know, you can also construct a bill that makes it very difficult to implement as well.
Yeah, so I think what you will see, and we'll have follow-up after the bill starts moving, I think what you will see is a bill that does not require multiple doctors, that increases cost and reduces access, or has people come before a panel. What we would like to do is, if the people of Florida voted for this as a medicine, then I don't think it's unreasonable to treat it as a medicine. This is something that is going to be taken by children. The House will not support the smoking of marijuana for children. The studies are just not conclusive enough. Part of our bill will be an extensive study at the University of Florida, hopefully in conjunction with the other universities, to fully understand what are the effects of smoking marijuana.
So you may differentiate that you may allow smokable marijuana for adults, but not for children under the age of 18.
The House bill will allow smokable marijuana for adults.
Okay. Let's talk about, you were one of the primary sponsors on the bill that passed with regard to after the tragedy in Parkland, setting up certain restrictions and red flag laws. There's some concern that there may be efforts in the legislature this year to roll back some of those issues, whether it's your bill moved the age to buy a long gun from 18 to 21, creating red flag laws, doing a number of things like that. Do you think that there will be a serious effort, or would you support rolling back any of those things that you passed in the original bill?
No, I mean, imagine how disingenuous it would be of me to have been the sponsor of the bill. It was last year, but really it was just a few months ago, and then to now write law to repeal that. Either
you don't know there's going to be an effort to try to undermine
well, sure. I mean,
it.
Listen, members of the legislature are free to file whatever bills they'd like to file. I'm just from my standpoint and from a leadership role, it would be disingenuous of me to have crafted a bill, passed it through the House, and then come back and try to repeal parts of it. I don't. It would either say something about my thinking then or my thinking now.
How do you think the bill is working? For instance, the red flag laws. Do you think that they're working well?
I don't believe that we're doing everything we can. I think we've spent a lot of money. We made a massive commitment in money. We've started to create at a good rate a mental health safety net. But I'm concerned. I'm concerned that in Broward County, where this terrible tragedy happened, as of December, when the report came out, they still did not yet have policies in place that would have prevented this. I'm concerned that it has become an issue, a political issue about guns, as opposed to the safety of a school and how we truly keep our children safe. I think that, like a lot of issues, it gets highly politicized, but I don't feel that we are significantly more safe than we were last year.
One of the issues that's going to come before the legislature is the question of whether or not the Guardian program, which allowed for certain people on campuses, non-instructional people, to be armed, to go through training and carry a weapon. This is likely to try to be expanded to include teachers having that option if they so choose and decide to go through the training. Do you support that?
I do. I think, and that's what people don't understand. When we have images in our mind, and when someone says a teacher with a gun, you know, the first thing in your mind is your second grade teacher, Miss Murphy, and you thought, my goodness, you know,
mine was Miss Desi.
Yeah, Miss Murphy couldn't possibly carry a gun. Well, Miss Murphy would have never passed the almost military-like training that it would have taken to have been deputized by the local sheriff to carry a gun. Miss Murphy couldn't have possibly done the continuing education required or the continuing training to maintain that proficiency. Now, Miss Murphy was my favorite teacher that I had the entire time I was in school. We loved her. But that would not be a person I'd see with a gun. Coach Aaron Feiss, who stood before an assailant with a weapon and guarded children from it, that man should have been armed on that day.
But the current bill would have allowed Coach Feiss probably to be armed.
Yes.
We're talking about expanding the bill to include teachers.
I would expand it to anyone that can pass a rigorous physical and mental test and have the proficiency to be deputized by a local sheriff.
Do you worry that introducing more guns into schools may make schools less safe, though?
I don't believe so, because there's nowhere that we introduce more trained people with weapons do we have more gun violence. You know, the president walks around, goes around the country highly protected. Some of our state officials go around protected. Some members of Congress go around protected.
But there's a difference between sworn law enforcement officers and somebody like a teacher. You know, I've had this discussion before, and I almost liken it to if you give somebody a hammer, everything starts looking like a nail. If you give a teacher a gun...
Isn't that a terrible assumption, though? I mean, think about that for a moment. You're saying that if a teacher gets a gun, all of a sudden it starts to seem like that's the weapon they should use. They should use that instrument to solve all problems. But you're also saying that isn't there a difference between someone who's deputized? And this is an important fact, and people don't know this. There isn't a difference, because the only reason to carry a weapon, the only way you can carry a weapon inside a classroom is to have gone through the same program and to be deputized. And so, but
I understand that from a shooting perspective, the training is the same. But the rigors of going through a law enforcement academy, it's not the same as going through the police academy. The shooting portion of it, the gun portion of it may be similar, but there's a whole lot more in terms of the mentality of a police officer, in terms of their training, what they go through, and including probationary period, that is far more extensive than just that portion of that deals with the firearm.
I disagree, Jim. I wrote the law. There is actually more firearm training for an in-school guardian than there is for a police officer. What a police officer has differently, you're right, is the understanding of the law. They have to interact on a daily basis, and they have to apply those laws to traffic stops, domestic violence, and everything else. A guardian inside of a school would never have to in any way engage anyone on any of those legal matters. The bill is very specific. That weapon cannot be used to break up fights, in-school disturbances, any sort of issue. The only issue in which a teacher may use that weapon is in the event of an active shooter. That is the single issue.
Let's stay with education.
Yeah.
So where do we see education funding going this year? The governor seems to want to expand school vouchers, what you would refer to as school choice programs. I think you're a proponent of that as well. Talk to me about where you see that going over the next 60 days.
I think that our goal is to continue to move in a direction that has shown statistically, undeniably, to be a better system, and that is a system of choice. There are many traditional public schools that are doing well, and parents are happy to have their children there, and that should remain as an option. There are also public schools inside this state and some in our community that are failing. And those parents should be able to move those children into a different situation, and the money should follow that child. It seems easy enough in concept. What creates the complication of it, of course, is the politics. The idea that we want to dismantle public schools. I went to public schools myself, 2 of them pretty good schools, 1 of them quite bad. I wish that I would have had the option to, at least during that middle school period, to have chosen another school. I wish my parents would have had the option. We couldn't. It is completely unconscionable to tell someone, and the most affected are the people in my communities and in all the inner cities, that this is a school you're assigned to, and even though the taxpayer is paying for your education, you will have to expend it there. I don't see how people can stand in the way, and less people are starting to stand in the way because they've seen the results of allowing a parent to move the money with that child to another facility.
Moving that money, though, doesn't move the accountability. What accountability should there be on those private schools that are accepting state dollars? We don't. So you talk about schools that are failing because they go through a testing program.
That's right.
There's no testing program for those private schools. We don't know if they're failing those kids. We also don't know what level of accountability there is in general. So how do you? So it seems like you're creating a system where you're taking dollars from a system where there is at least some accountability and moving it into a system, a private system, where there's little to no accountability.
Well, I would say so. Little to no accountability again makes the assumption that the only accountability comes from the government, and that is a paternalistic view of how we should run our societies. The accountability is the parent. Do you think that a parent that moves a child from a school that they are not progressing at to another school all of a sudden loses their ability to judge whether they're progressing in that school? There is accountability, but we have to stop thinking that we're here to solve everyone's problems. There are parents in place. They have the best interest of their child. This is their taxpayer dollars, and what we've seen from the time that Governor Jeb Bush first opened the first charter school in the state of Florida to today has been a dramatic fall in the amount of failing schools and an increase in our reading levels, both in third grade and our math levels. This is what we're seeing. There is a reason that charter schools continue to flourish. There's a reason that parents are making those choices, and it's because they work.
There's an issue. Miami-Dade County voters voted to raise property taxes in order to pay teachers more money in the public school system. There seems to be an effort brewing in the legislature to take some of that money and give it to teacher salary increases in the private school system.
Well, so
do you support that?
No, I don't support giving that money to teachers in a private school system. I support giving it to teachers whose funding comes from the public. And that is to say, a charter school is a public charter school. It is not a private school. A voucher system would allow you to take your money to a private school. That's a different case. The voters of Dade County that are paying for this additional tax also have children in public charter schools.
But the amendment the measure that was voted on by the public did not suggest that the money was going to leave the public school system and go into charter schools.
But the charter schools are public schools. Give me your definition of public. If it is the public that is paying for a service, then that is a public function. And if there are teachers within that public service, and the public has said our teachers teaching our children with our tax dollars should be making more money, and we're willing to tax ourselves further to do it, how can one segregate a teacher at a traditional public school from a teacher at a charter public school? It just doesn't make any sense.
So you would support that measure?
Not only will I support it, but I hope that it's something that we can get done quickly.
So you're planning on making it a priority?
I am.
What are your other priorities? We talked a little bit. We're going to wrap up here, but you talked a little bit about obviously health care. We talked about education, budgets. That one bill. Anything? What else have we talked about that you want to sort of touch on?
A couple of things. One, the university system. This is a real concern. We have the finest public university system in the country, and we should be proud of that. UF is one of the top 10 universities, public universities in the country. We should be proud of that. But the amount of money that we are spending, and the rate at which construction in these universities for big, shiny new buildings is happening is truly alarming. Every year we pour in tens of millions of additional new dollars. In a lot of these universities, it isn't the faculty, the amount of teachers that's growing, it is the administration that's growing. Salaries are becoming larger. We're seeing a lot of lavish offices and lavish travel. We have to make sure that our university system is available but isn't running away with its costs.
Jose Oliva, there's a lot that we could probably get to as well. Obviously, I want you to come back throughout the session. I want to continue this conversation. I think it's important that we do that and that you have this opportunity and ability to speak. So, Oliva, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we'll be right back.